What's going on, everybody? Today I want to talk about how to control social media and use it to your advantage. When we talk about social media, we have to talk about attention and attention span in a human being, and basically a lot of what the social media and controlling and using social media to our advantage challenge comes from the challenge of attention, and how valuable and how easily we can lose our attention as human beings. And once we really understand how critical it is to maintain and control our attention, and that attention is a muscle that can be trained and it can be expanded with time up to limits, and it can be controlled just like we can train our muscles to grow bigger and to grow stronger. We can also control our attention span through different techniques. So we can basically expand and control and benefit as much as we can from our attention, or the tool of attention span that we have, and not let it go weak with a lot of the abuse that happens with a lot of the modern platforms and electronic devices and social media platforms that are specifically designed to keep us on these platforms for the longest time possible. And they're basically doing that through a multitude of techniques, right? So a lot of these techniques revolve around abusing the dopamine circuit of the human brain, and this goes to the psychological design of a lot of these platforms, right? So a lot of these platforms are designed in such a way that involve a lot of gamification and simplification. So if you study a lot of these platforms of social media that we use nowadays, whether it's the older ones or the new ones coming into the space right now, a lot of it revolve around the concept of gamification, right? So it's designed to be a game that has some level of interaction between the user and the game, and through the scrolling mechanism, or clicking of specific buttons. And those buttons, when we click them, we get a specific, you could say, a dopamine hit, or we get a response um, when we interact with these specific applications, and they release specific types of visual cues, or audio cues to further engage us in these gamified mechanisms, right? And a big aspect of that gamification is also the simplification. So they're not just games that require minimal effort. They're also games that are very much simplified, right? So they don't require a lot of effort, except scrolling, looking at specific things that we might be interested in, or that are recommended to us based on algorithms that are mathematically designed to go through what we are most likely to watch, to recommend to us some of these same types of contents that we might also be likely to watch, right? So it revolves a lot about on the idea of trying to keep us on these platforms as much as possible, and basically harvest our attention to the longest term possible on these platforms. And not just, this goes to the idea of not just consuming a lot of our time, but also consuming a lot of our money when it comes to specific types of these social media applications and platforms. So it's not just an issue of time. So the gamification and the simplification of these gaming mechanisms, and abusing the dopamine cycle through the cues and reward and response types of mechanisms that goes on with these, a lot of these social media platforms, is one of the key things in how they can harvest our attention and keep us on these social media platforms in a non-productive manner for such long periods of time, and to control a lot of these, or to reverse a lot of these, and reverse engineer a lot of these effects that we go through with social media and the scrolling life. we have to understand the human attention span, control and the human attention span, and be able to use it to our advantage, and understand that the attention span is a muscle that can actually be controlled and trained. Just like we can train our muscles by working out, we can also train our attention span through a multitude of different mechanisms and techniques that we can use to our advantage, so we can restrict the harms of some of these platforms, and also expand and empower ourselves through enhancing our attention span and our ability to focus and concentrate for extended and long periods of time. A second thing is I want to talk about how social media affects our mental state, and this is a very, very crucial issue here that I, felt, and a lot of people have felt in their lives, and felt that their productivity and their basically their life is being stolen away from them, and they're basically sitting there helpless. They're not able to counter the effects of these social media platforms in such a weird manner, because in many instances we think that we have control over our brains, and we're conscious and sane human beings, adults. But in many instances we sit helpless in front of these social media and different applications, and where just our life is being stolen away from us, and our whole plans and goals are being disintegrated, and we're not able to do anything. We're just sitting there helpless, trying to get our life back, as we watch our life being wasted in front of our eyes, second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour, and we cannot do anything, and we don't have any plans to counter the harmful effects of these social media platforms. And people can take this lightly, but you can see and witness the harmful effects that this has on people, and how people can be wasting years, tens of years of their lives on these different social media applications, while not getting really anything. They're not even getting some sort of valuable information that they can use to excel in their own lives. But it's just some form of plain and dumb entertainment that doesn't really lead to anything except the abuse of the dopamine circuit and the harvesting of people's attention through a multitude of the techniques that we talked about before. And there is mainly two ways, among so many other ways, that social media platforms can cause us to feel not satisfied with our lives and discontent with our lives. And the first aspect of this is framing, okay, which is when we watch a lot of other people and we watch their lives, we basically go into the problem of framing. And what I mean by that is we are framing our lives in the context of somebody else's life. So we see somebody, we see the structure that they have, maybe the videos or the pictures that they post on social media, and they project themselves in a very specific image. Maybe it's a beautiful camera with beautiful lenses showing fancy houses or a lot of cars, and many times we don't really know what is the accuracy and the reliability of this. Is this an accurate life that these people are portraying, or this is just an image that they are compiling together falsely, so they can deceive people into thinking that they have a life that they don't really have? And then we go back to ourselves and we frame our lives in the context of what other people are projecting on us. And this goes deep into psychology and psychological projection, meaning everybody on social media is framing life in a specific way, meaning to be successful you have to be 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to have this type of house, this type of car, this type of life, and then they frame life in that manner. So when we watch that, we subconsciously absorb this framing of life, and then we tend to look at our lives in the light of that framing. And this framing might not be even an accurate framing in the first place. So the framing of life in terms of, let's say, for example, the materialistic possessions, which is some of what a lot of people on social media tend to do, could be in actuality not a very representational image of happiness in life or being content in one's life. And the people that portray those images, they might, number one, they might not have these materialistic possessions in the first place. It might be just a false image that they're trying to portray through, showing things that they don't have or projecting things that they might not actually have achieved personally. But number two, and most importantly, is the fact that these things might not actually be a representation or an accurate representation of what, happiness or true success to you as a human being, or to a lot of the people that are watching these platforms might be. So basically, we get framed, or we get sold, or we accept the false frame by a lot of these social media personalities that they frame life in such a way, and we just subconsciously we take that frame for granted through accepting these images that these people portray, and thus we basically judge our lives based on that frame. And if we do not match that frame, then that completely puts us into a status of being unsatisfied with our lives and going into depression and or feeling not good enough and not worthy enough, because we don't see ourselves psychologically in the frame that these people frame on a lot of these social media platforms. And then we get to the second problem, which is the problem of comparison, right? So first of all, the frame gets, in some psychological ways, subconsciously accepted by a lot of people, that a lot of us that watch these platforms, and then we start comparing ourselves to a lot of these, images. That many of them might be false images, but we start comparing ourselves and our standards of living to a lot of these images that gets portrayed by a lot of people on a lot of these social media platforms. And from there, the feelings of being not worthy, being unsatisfied with our lives, and being not good enough gets even more validated and more engraved in our psychology and in our subconscious mind. And we go into this phase or cycle of being disgrateful and discontent with our lives. And then the more we do it, the more difficult it gets for us to actually break through the cycle and get out of the cycle and understand that the framing actually might be false, and that the comparison is even a more false approach that we can have when we engage with a lot of these social media platforms. Now, the third aspect that we want to talk about is the structure beyond the monkey mind. And basically, once we understand how the human mind works, and we really understand that we overestimate how much control and how much discipline we can have over our own mind. And it's actually mind-boggling how very little control we have over our mind once you really dig deep into the research, and once you really dig deep into the psychiatric and psychological research, and how easily we can get influenced by a lot of these things out there, a lot of the advertisements, a lot of the social media platforms, how easily we can get tricked to do things and to take courses of action that might not be even in line with our own beliefs and our own ideologies. And through these different mechanisms, that's how a lot of these social media platforms, they actually get us, right? So once we understand the human mind, or should I call it the monkey mind, and a lot of the different mechanisms involved psychologically in this mind and how little control we have, we can understand how to use structures or systems that cannot be broken. And if you think about it, this is really the only way to engage in efficient impulse control when it comes to these social media, because we have these devices and electronic devices, and we have access to these social media platforms basically all our day and all our lives. We have them on us, we have them all the time, and they're so accessible that it is very, very easy to go on these social media platforms and access them, and just from there waste hundreds of hours on these different platforms. And and there are three main ways that I'm going to talk about when it comes to designing structures beyond the monkey mind, right? And these structures will be removal, locking, and dimensionality restriction. And this could relate to a big concept in machine learning, but I'm not going to get into that, which is dimensionality reduction. But what we're talking about here is dimensionality restriction, right? So number one is removal, right? So what the mind basically cannot see, it cannot interact with. And this is a very basic and very simple concept, right? So if we don't have a phone, if you don't have the phone around us, we cannot get on a social media platform. And this is a very simple concept, which is, if you have problems, playing too much video games, you might basically take that gaming device, give it to somebody else, remove it, go sell it to somebody, and basically you don't have the device anymore. So removal, right? And but even there, it is so hard to actually get to the phase of removal, where we can actually remove the same device that we're addicted to. So even that stage is an advanced stage for a lot of people, because how can we get rid of our phones, right? And I'm going to talk about that and how we can implement a way that is basically a mixture of two techniques that we can use, so we can basically engage in this stage of removal, right? Removal of our of the devices, or basically the instruments that cause the cue for our addiction, right? And the second thing basically is locking, and by locking I mean locking or specific functionalities of these devices and mechanisms or instruments, right? And for example, let's say locking would be taking your phone and not allowing specific applications to be installed on the phone. And this can be done through a multitude of softwares, but also some of it can be done with internal functions of the applications themselves, right? So there are so many applications and there are so many ways to restrict the use of operating systems, for example, if you're on your laptop or computer. And there's also a lot of ways to be able to restrict the use of specific functionality, including social media applications, and including a lot of different applications and a lot of different websites in the computer through, for example, in the computer, a lot of people might know the hosts, changing the hosts file, or a lot of other different types of software and firewalls, either on the computer, but can also extend to the mobile devices that we can use to restrict access to a lot of IP addresses, whether these IP addresses go through websites or specific applications, but also locking the use of specific applications for extended periods of time. And this is one of the most valuable ways. So after basically complete removal of the device, we can either combine that or use it with the technique of locking, which is where we lock specific functionality of that device for extended or periods of time, or for however we like, so we can have better control of the addictions, or we can have structures that the monkey mind basically cannot overcome, right? And number three is I want to talk about dimensionality restriction, right? And dimensionality restriction basically means that we restrict the use of some of these devices in only one type of use, right? So, like the phone, we can only restrict the use of a phone to one function, and let's say that function could be, for example, accepting phone calls, or that function could be taking text messages, and that's basically it. And we remove all the other dimensions of using that phone from the device itself, right? And this could be done through so many different ways, through actually getting a completely different device that is not capable of doing or installing a lot of these social media apps, or by manipulating the functionality of the phone itself in such a manner that we can basically engage in this dimensionality restriction, so that we can use it for 1, 2, 3, or however multitude of purposes that we like, in such a way that we'd be able to avoid the addiction or the attention harvesting that is being perpetuated by a lot of these social media platforms. Now, what about the methods to achieve these goals? And basically, when we talk about the methods to achieve these goals, they're going to revolve around mainly two points. And number one is the gamification of goal achievable. And just like a lot of these social media platforms, they use gamification and simplification to their advantage, so they can keep us on these platforms for very long periods of time, and take advantage of dopamine. We can also use gamification to our advantage, so we can reverse the same effects that are being used by these social media platforms. And although with a group of conditions, and one of these conditions is that this cannot be done through the same device where our addiction takes place, meaning, like, if we're gonna record or interact with that specific type of game that we will use to counteract our addictions to some of these devices or social media platforms, we cannot use the same device to interact with that system or that game, where we record our those interactions as we try to move away from that device, because this is going to conflict with with the concept of structures beyond the monkey mind. Meaning, in this manner, we're going to give our mind the chance to slip out of that structure and go back to engaging with these social media platforms, and we cannot let that happen. So, as we gamify our discipline and our impulse control, we have to use a medium different from the medium on which we interact with these social media platforms that we have our main problems of addictions with. Okay, and this is the first point. And the second point is, and this is a very crucial point, is a supervision from an external source. And this point is extremely important, right? Because, statistically speaking, our ability to reach our goal exponentially increases once we have somebody else, a second party, hold us accountable to that, to achieving that goal, or to achieving those specific tasks. And this is a very crucial part of this program, which is there has to be somebody that follows through, and there has to be consequences with regards to achieving our goals. Otherwise, there is no external supervision on us, maintaining that program and keeping that program, and reminding us when we actually skip a step or not engage in our plan to get rid of these addictions and control these platforms in the manners that we talked about. So thus the whole program can basically go to waste. and we might end up going back to the same cycle in engaging with these social media platforms in addictive and wasting or wasteful manner, and we would not be making any progress in this journey to control and use basically social media and these applications to our advantage. So gamification along with external supervisions are two of the main culprits among a bunch of other ways that we can utilize to basically solidify our control over the process of getting rid of our addiction to these social media platforms. Now, if you guys found value in this information, and I know you did, please like this video and leave any comments if you have any additional input on the whole premise of social media and using it to our advantage. And go to tigpub.com for a version of the complete program that can help us to basically get hold and get control of our social media and use it to our advantage so it can fit with our lives in a way that pushes us forward and helps us achieve our goals instead of being a tool to waste our time.